And I would be extremely wary of doing that. I mean, I think that there are some very subtle ways of being captured in that success that you're describing. And I, for one, am not sure I would be able to manage that in a way that would satisfy my sense of responsibility to what I'm talking about.
I can just comment and disagree really quickly. I don't think that capitalism destroys the need for philosophy. And speaking from my own experience as someone who growing up extremely American and immersed in comedy, and then coming to philosophy from that, the need for philosophy it's not that easy to die, and you don't really need to seduce it. I think that there's a way, I'm not speaking of success here, like this changing methods in order to become successful, to pass, to market, but that there is a place that comedy does something so similar to philosophy sometimes. It's not moving like dressing it up, adding something to it. It's moving horizontal. It's just translation, I guess.
Can I?
Suddenly there are hands. I don't know what.
And I don't have you anymore.
Yeah, my question it refers back to your book, The Claim of Language, because in my reading of it, towards the very end, you do make some suggestions for a new pedagogy, and my reading of that book struck me as in some ways being targeted to an American audience and being somewhat optimistic for the possibility of some viable change within the broader academic community.
That was my last gasp. That was my last gasp.
And one of the concepts that I thought was particularly interesting was the idea of being together and this being togetherness of kind of forming this sense of community. So I guess my question is just how do you what do you see as the current status, the present status of the claim of language? Maybe both in the sense of the text, the claim of language, but also the idea that underpins
it. Thank you for that question. That's a strong question that really hits home. I've never imagined that philosophy should become the kind of work that I do should become of appeal to a large number of people. I've always imagined that not that it's the concern of the few, as some might say it, not that it's elitist, but simply that the kind of engagement that is involved in this sort of thinking and interaction and exchange in community will mean there's a commitment that relatively few will undertake, and so community will be an extremely fluid thing. It will be a very contingent thing. It will be a very passing thing, and it will involve relatively small numbers of people. So I've never hoped, going from North America to Europe and in the recent movement, that here I can get an audience, right? I didn't get an audience there. Here I can get an audience, and maybe I can sell more books and so forth. Have a bigger play, in the national context. And in that respect, the successes that I referred to, in North America, they were small successes, but nevertheless they were just as concrete as anything that I would hope to find here in Europe. But at the same time, I'm trying to talk about this socio-political context in which these configurations were occurring, and I found that context to be increasingly undermining for the kinds of the kind of engagements, or what I tried to write a paper recently called counter movements that I was trying to achieve there. So part of there were a couple of moments here where I expressed some real cynicism in relation to my experience in Europe, and I wonder if it's not the case that I could go back now in some ways and start to re-engage those kinds of movements. I'm not sure. But there's another thing that I would want to say, and that is having made this movement, and having discovered these different axes of how could I say, intellectual, socioeconomic, political axes of influence, in a different global configuration, I think I could go back to the U.S. and inhabit differently than I did. But this movement has been necessary to me in order to achieve that. Now, I think I wouldn't be doing the same kind of work though in the United States. This is something I've been discovering recently. I'm working more with people outside the realm of philosophy, pursuing a kind of thinking, but artists and people in other domains. And I think that part of this sort of liberation that I'm describing, of moving outside the American context, discovering different axes of influence and lines of intellectual life, I think that's taking me out of what is a far too isolating and local framework, which is this, what I called here, this post-Heideggerian thinking. So in some respects, one of the limitations of this text, I think, is the limitation of my own, the tradition in which I've been working. And part of the problem with this essay, in a sense, is yes, if you stay within that tradition, you're going to start running into these kinds of problems. And part of what has to happen is a shift in sites of activity. At the same time, though, I'm deeply committed to this tradition. I have questions I want to carry forward, and for the moment, I'm quite happy to be where I am in that respect. But I thank you for that, because I was trying to describe under what conditions can there be a concrete engagement with language, with the material conditions in which one's living, which is at the same time in a community, a being with. And I would absolutely say yes, one could do that in North America just as well as one could do it here.
These are some remarks which may lead up to a question, but I felt, I hate to introduce something with I felt, but I felt some uneasiness being European. I mean, there's a strange addressee function. I think this might have been shared by others. There were, in the questions, there were several problems with the America-Europe distinction. Matisse was talking about, that actually it's nice to go outside, be unburdened. Evitel was pointing towards, all kinds of geographical problems that you run into. And so I was wondering whether maybe that your question that you're asking yourself is maybe not too broad, but too narrow. Maybe it should be a question of what is a home, and what does a home mean to thought. And I know this is extremely abstract, but it seems that there is still a notion of an abstracted earth or something that is hovering and impeding in some way, which gives the possibility of reactions like
you mean this is still too anchored in a geographical reference? No,
not you, but that the naming of the country or of the whatever entity it is evading the real question, which I think is closely linked to what you have been discussing the last few days as the house of language, which you clearly define, at least it seems to be one of the center points of your readings of Heidegger. But this is a guess. This is
well, I think I would want to agree with you, but I would want to say that I was trying to attend to the question that you're asking in my insistent references to an ethos. That's why I was implicitly distinguishing the idea of a home from what I was calling an ethos that I was seeking. And I was trying to suggest, following Heidegger, where Heidegger says that we think the word ethos in relation to dwelling. That's what he proposes in the letter on humanism. And I was trying to suggest that I'm trying to find the conditions of dwelling, and dwelling in remembrance, as I was saying at the end. And I can perfectly well tell you, my home is in Brooklyn, right? Or I don't mind identifying myself as American. So there is home in that sense, and I was then speaking somewhat loosely of finding a home in philosophy someplace.